I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids or Childfree Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids or Childfree Podcast. Today is a solo episode because we are wrapping up season 5 of the podcast. And it is totally unreal to me that this is already our 76th episode of the podcast. We've been at it for about a year and a half now, and I've just had so many wonderful conversations. I continue to love hosting this show so much. I am really grateful for all of the podcast, all of the positive feedback that I continue getting about the podcast. All of your guest suggestions. Really appreciate you weighing in on these conversations, hearing how they've impacted you. It seems that more and more people are discovering me and the work that I'm doing through the podcast. So that is also super cool. So if you have suggestions in terms of guests that you'd like to hear from in season 6 of the podcast, I'm going to be starting to record those episodes in these coming weeks before I bring back a brand new season, which is going to be kicking off on the 10th of September. So if there's anyone in particular you want to hear from, send me an email, drop me a DM on Instagram. Know that whether or not we bring that particular guest or that particular topic to the table in the immediate future or a little ways down the road, that I have a running list of different ideas. And despite the fact that I've now put out so many conversations, that list seems to be growing by the day and by the week. So be patient. Feel free to hit me up again if you haven't heard the kind of, perspective or story that you're looking for. And in the meantime, I am just super glad that you are enjoying all of these different conversations, and also for the feedback on the solo episodes that I host here on the podcast. So today we're going to do a wrap-up episode along the lines of what we did at the end of season 4, which is I'm going to be sharing some of the key takeaways or themes or ideas that have been cropping up in both my private coaching sessions as well as in the group programs that I host, the workshops and the like. And I'm going to be connecting these back to certain podcast episodes that you might want to tune into if you've not already done so. Sort of thinking about what's been happening over these last, 15 or so weeks since we've been airing season 5, what's been happening inside my coaching sessions. And in the hopes that there is going to be some perspectives and ideas and perhaps challenges you're facing that you see echoed in these examples that I'm going to give. So I think I've got 5 different ones I'm going to run through. Let's get into it, shall we? The first thing that has been coming up a lot for a lot of my clients, and this has been in particular inside my one-on-one sessions, but I'm also really noticing this with quite a few of the couples that I'm working with, is that this kids or child-free decision is going to put whatever is going on in your relationship, if you are partnered, under a microscope. And this happens in a couple different ways. So I want to say, first of all, I hear from most of you, not all of you, but most of you, I have a good relationship. There's a lot of respect between my partner and I. We've got good communication. This decision is a factor, perhaps in conflict, especially if you're not on the same page around this decision. But even if both of you are ambivalent or unsure and grappling with this, the initial take I get from a lot of couples is like, yeah, things are good aside from this decision, which we're coming up against. And yet when we dig a little bit deeper, what we often see is that the sort of way in which you are communicating or relating or struggling in this decision with your partner, that is also often indicative of other things that are going on in the relationship. And what often comes to the forefront is like, oh, there's actually some other things that we have been struggling with or maybe sort of pushing under the rug that are rearing their ugly heads as we confront this decision. And this is not to imply, by the way, that like, oh, you've got all these hidden problems in your relationship and you just don't know until you tackle the kids or child-free decision. Certainly that might be the case for some of you. But it's more likely that you've been able to sort of like function or manage pretty well, that maybe, again, some of those communication breakdowns or way of relating with each other aren't that apparent in your day-to-day. But when you're confronting such a big life-changing decision such as this one, all of a sudden those ways of relating and being are thrust to the forefront. So, for example, it could be something like maybe not always expressing what your needs are or being clear with one another about what it is you want. But of course, we need to get really connected with our needs and what we want when we're grappling with this kids or child-free decision. It could be that, let's say, maybe on the home front, there's a little bit of resentment building because one of you I'm going to be honest, in heterosexual partners, it's usually the woman is taking on more of the load at home. And so there's this sense of reluctance of like, I'm going to be doing even more of that times 10 if I have a child. And yet my partner's got all this enthusiasm and saying, hey, what's the problem? Like, let's go ahead and have a kid or kids. So again, things have been like sort of working, but maybe simmering under the surface. And there's this big fear and or this realization that these concerns are being brought to the forefront through this, I don't want to call it conflict, but through this decision itself. So a question that you might ask yourself, and one that I've been asking some of my clients, is considering what aspects of your relationship or relationship dynamic would either lend themselves or be supportive of having kids. So for example, you might say like, we make a really good team, or we love having adventures together. We're each other's best friend. Like those might lend themselves really well to being parents together. And vice versa, what aspects of your relationship or relationship dynamic would maybe be in conflict with having kids? So again, maybe this sense of like, I'm doing more on the home front, I think would become a problem if we were to have kids. Or I feel like we're not really able to openly communicate, let's say, our emotional needs with each other. I think that could be difficult. And this is showing you some areas that you probably want to give some attention and love to and work through some stuff. Not to say everything has to be perfectly sorted out before and if you choose to have kids or choose to stay child-free for that matter, but that it's going to be part of that journey as well. And again, specifically in the couples work that I'm doing, I'm seeing a lot of people like, okay, there's other stuff going on here that we want to make sure we can work through, resolve, and or have some support around if we are to, in particular, pursue having a child or children together. Now, of course, this can also apply with being child-free as well. You know, for example, if let's say there's a sense that there's not that much that unites you and your partner as or in a sense of family. And maybe there's this feeling that having a child would bring a greater sense of family between the two of you. Or, there might be some themes going on there around purpose or meaning. And so confronting or considering the child-free path can really bring that to the forefront. So I would consider this not to be a bad thing, the idea that the kids or child-free choice is going to put your relationship under a microscope, but really an opportunity and a good thing. Now, if you are resonating with this idea, if you're like, oh yeah, I can see how this is going on for me as well, check out the following couple of podcast episodes. Now, episode 63 with Christine Chillian, which is called The Long View of Parenting. That was the name of that episode. She articulates this really well. And she says that, things in a sense didn't change too much between her and her husband when they had their sons. But actually, again, like it sort of exacerbated or put a spotlight on certain aspects of their dynamic. And for her, it sounds like it was like a largely positive thing. She said, we have had a lot of, I think they still do, a lot of humor and playfulness in our relationship. And that's something that showed up in the way that we raised our kids. This idea of also being under a microscope or, as she says, like a spotlight is something that we talk about in episode 66, which is the Dear Former Fence Sitter number 2 episode, the second one I've done with therapist and past guest Amanda E. White. She's been on the podcast a few times now. So we sort of bounce this idea around together, and you might also enjoy listening to that one. Okay, the second thing that has been coming up in coaching sessions over these last several weeks of the season 5 of the podcast is that the kids or child-free decision really forces you to confront reality, which can be hard, right? A lot of us, I don't want to say we're in denial of reality, but we're hopeful when we look to the future. We think about how we would like things to be, how we might want them to change both personally in terms of our relationship, in terms of hobbies and friends and family. And you might have even heard me or seen me in recent weeks talking about this on Instagram. And it's something that we talked about quite in depth inside a recent kids or child-free support series session I ran called Find Calm in the Storm. And that is that when we're exploring the kids or child-free decision, we really need to confront what I call the undeniable truth of your situation. And this can look a couple different ways. And the first of which is what we were talking about primarily in this Find Calm in the Storm support series session. And by the way, if you're interested in the support series, you will find links on that in the show notes of today's episode. But that is the fact that when we come to this decision, a lot of us are just wanting or hoping things to be different around the decision and the decision process itself. So that looks like, for example, wanting to just know what the right path is, or anticipating or hoping that now that you're 35, again, this magical realization will appear. And something that came up with the women who attended this session was that for them, the undeniable truth is, what I'm doing is not working. I'm not getting any younger. I'm 38, I'm 40, I'm 42, whatever it is. And I've got to do something different. And there was something really powerful about them having this realization, like looking at things objectively, that I need to approach things differently. I need to be a really active participant in this decision process. The other way this shows up is like in the dynamics or sort of like moving parts of the not relationship. It could be, but like your life situation itself. So we can use, your relationship as an example. It might be that you recognize your partner would perhaps not be a great person to parent with, for example, or maybe your partner is very firmly for kids or against kids and like has no openness to consider the other path. That might be something that you would hope is different, or that you'd like to change, or that you want to ignore because it's not what your ideal sort of version of this decision would be. But you need to confront that and be honest. And if that honesty looks like this relationship or this partner is not a great one to move forward with in terms of having kids, you need to make your decision within the confines of that decision, right? Whether that be, we need to look at improving or changing our relationship. I need to look at potentially exiting this relationship. I need to consider if I want to have kids on my own. We need to, maybe we're going to stay together, but it means that we're not going to have children together. We need to be considering our options in light of what is, rather than what we would like things to be. And hey, I'm going to be like the very first person to tell you, you can change your life. Like you absolutely can control, not everything, but certain things and aspects of your life, certain outcomes, how the sort of things you take action on. And we also need to be realistic about where we're at. To go back to the age thing, if you're like, oh gosh, it would have been nice if I had like met my partner when I was 32 instead of now at age 39. And now that I'm feeling like it's too late, and now that my gynecologist is saying like it might be hard for me to conceive, I understand the desire for things to have happened differently. But the fact is, you're not 32, you're 39, and things are as they are. And you need to decide within the confines of your situation. So you might want to check out for this one, if this is speaking to you, episode 75 of the podcast with Ruthie Ackerman. It was our most recent episode. It's called Ruthie Ackerman on the Mother Code, which is also the name of her fantastic memoir, which I highly suggest checking out. Ruthie confronts all kinds of things in her story. And part of the reason I love talking to her is I was like, oh my gosh, so many of the things that you grappled with are things that I'm hearing about from my clients, whether that be having a difference of opinion on having kids from her first husband, who she ends up splitting up with, whether that's aging and the troubles she faces getting pregnant, whether that be her family history and struggles with mental illness. All those things she's got to come face to face with. And part of her story, and what you'll hear about in the episode, is like a little bit of a denial of that, or just wanting to kind of wait things out and see what happens. But she comes up against these various truths, or the way things are, again and again. And it essentially forces her to have some agency in her own life to say, like, what do I really want and how can I act on this? So again, that's episode 75 with Ruthie Ackerman. All right, if you have not heard about our Kids or Child-Free Support Series, I'm going to give you a quick recap on what that is, and then I want to tell you about the All Access Pass that we have on sale only until August 26th. All right, so Support Series, what is it? These are monthly calls that are deep dives into various topics of the kids or child-free decision where I see people most frequently getting stuck. And they're effectively workshop style. They're 2 hours long. We have discussion. I do some teaching. We share and sort of journal on different prompts and reflections. Afterwards, you're going to get some questions and notes that you can go through in your own time. You'll get a recording of the session. If you can't attend live, you'll also get that replay. And in these sessions, you're going to be in the company of like-minded fence sitters who know what it's like to be stuck. Now, we have upcoming sessions on things like discovering your desires, figuring out, like, do I want kids? How much? What do I want in my life in general? Same for being child-free. Of course, this is really at the crux of this decision, but we're going to look specifically at desires and help you better attune yourself to yours. We've got sessions coming up about regret, about the fear of missing out. We've got a session about purpose and meaning. So all kinds of good things. These sessions stand alone. So you can attend one, you can attend three, you can attend all of them. And if you want to attend all 5 of the remaining sessions in the series, you can do so for $150 with our all access pass. And I just want to say, to me, this is the ticket that you want. If you want to get some support with this decision, you don't want to have to lay out a huge amount of money or a huge amount of time and energy. I mean, this decision does take time. If you want to be amongst others who get what it's like to be stuck, these are normally $45 each, but you can attend all 5 of the remaining sessions for $150, which I'll do the math for you. That's $30 each. It is do this, buy this pass. I don't care if you want to sign up for my group program, which starts in September, which I also would really recommend if you're on the fence. I don't care if you've attended or plan to attend an upcoming workshop, also recommend that. But this support series, if you're yeah, I totally am afraid of missing out. I definitely am worried I might regret this decision. I want to have a meaningful, purposeful life. Get your all access pass. For $150, you really can't argue with this. You also will get access to a Slack group of people who are on the fence where I share additional resources. We have conversations. So check that out. I will include the link. Again, that's the Kids or Child-Free Support Series. It is the all access pass you want to be purchasing. Of course, if you're I'm not interested in all those topics, or I don't have $150 to spend this month, no stress. Pick and choose the sessions you want to attend. Again, those are $45 each. Okay, the third theme that has been coming up in conversations with my clients has been that this kids or child-free decision is a vehicle for growth and transformation, or at least that's the potential it holds. And I think we sometimes see the decision in, I don't want to say practical terms. Of course, this is an emotional decision. I'm sure you all recognize that, but we're maybe not looking at it from a sort of zoomed out, elevated perspective on who we are, our life journey. We can even say considering this on a soul level of where we want to go, who we want to be, how we want to evolve. And I recognize not all of the language I'm using may resonate with you, but I do think this can apply in different ways to all of us. This decision has sort of an invitation within it to look at expanding oneself that goes even beyond the experience itself. So me, for example, I've chosen to be child-free. And of course, there's the practical aspects of how that looks with my life and the things that I do or don't do, or that I'm experiencing or not experiencing. But when we think about this decision as a vehicle for growth and transformation, it has caused me to really confront myself in ways of, I need to have more compassion for the choices that I'm choosing. There is an opportunity for me to develop comfort with being perhaps what you could say is other, right? Being someone who's chosen not to have kids. I am other relative to what most people in society choose. And when we make a decision and we essentially say yes to enduring the hardship, the discomfort, the upheaval, there is a way for us as people to really grow and transform and change that can be very, very profound. And we have to have openness to that. And you know what? I want to say that when we think of it in these terms, it may bring, I'm not sure if ease is the right way of looking at it, but yeah, a sort of broader view of this decision than simply, do I want to have kids or not? It's what is the journey I want to go on? How do I want to grow or be expanded? And how can I say yes to that? Now, this is also something we hear about from parents. And, I get that the sort of general consensus and conversation is oh, this is so profound and it's meaningful. And none of those things aren't true. I'm sure that is very much true for people who've chosen parenthood. But even beyond that, thinking about how you are shaped through the challenges and hardships of parenting, through the letting go of the need for control, for having to confront this anxiety or worry of my heart is outside my body and I am going to live life with this human I've created out there in this big wide world. And I can only do so much about that and the experiences they have. There's something really big in that. And I'm not going to position that as a bigger than not having kids, but there is an opportunity again for growth and transformation that is available. And I'm really appreciating the conversations that I've had and I'm having with people who view the parenthood decision in that light. And for that matter, the kids or the child-free decision in that light. So I've got a few different episodes you might want to tune into that I think explore this, if you will. The first being episode 70 with Charlotte Holmes, who spoke about your most true and aligned self. Now, she is child-free. She is a yogi and meditation teacher, and she has some really beautiful language and ways of explaining this decision and how it sort of relates to our soul's journey in a way that I personally found very helpful and comforting. There's also episode 71 with Shondees, who spoke about parenthood as a spiritual journey. And they are a spiritual mentor. They saw this experience and even the yes they received about having kids as a very spiritual calling, if you will. So that's another wonderful one to check out. And the third one would be episode 73 with Alyssa Strauss on When You Care is the name of the episode. And Alyssa talks about care and caring for others and having dependents who are reliant upon us for that care. And this can be through parenting, but it can be through other means as well. That there is a really beautiful opportunity there. And she calls it the life-changing magic of care. It's not to say it's amazing and wonderful and, fairies singing and sparkles and all that all the time, but that there can be something really unique to engaging in this kind of relationship with someone. So again, those are some episodes you might want to check out. Okay, the fourth thing that I've noticed coming up in recent conversations and something I love to ask all of my clients, this is something we explore quite in depth inside my Kids or Child-Free group coaching program, which, sidebar, we will have a new round of the program starting September 24th. As always, details and links on that in the show notes of today's episode. And that is the version of motherhood or child-free living that would make you a yes. And I like this idea of like, okay, if you were to say yes to motherhood, or if you were to say yes to child-free living, and I don't care which way you're leaning, right? Like you might say, actually, only 10% of me wants to be a mom. Okay, if we were to like expand or sort of compound that 10%, what would motherhood need to look like for you to be either an enthusiastic yes, or at least to have less reluctance than maybe you're feeling now? This is not my effort, by the way, to push somebody who is leaning 95% or 90%, child-free to say, oh, now you need to become a mom, but to feel like where is the resistance or what is it that you're actually looking for that might make you uncertain about a certain path. And by the way, this is also something that can be really helpful if you're with a partner who has very clear feelings on one decision or another. And you know that by choosing the opposite, there could be a breakdown or end of that relationship. And so, for example, somebody who says, my partner wants to have kids, I'm heavily leaning child-free, but I want to explore, I want to honor the possibility that I could be a parent. How am I going to do that? This is where we look at, okay, if you were to have more enthusiasm, if you were to say yes to your partner and having kids together, essentially, like, what are the kind of the conditions under which this would need to happen? And conditions is just one way of exploring this, but like, what kind of mom would you want to be? What would you want that relationship with your kids to be like or look like? Kid, for that matter. Starting with one is always a good idea, by the way, when exploring this decision. And again, that's not to push anybody into something that they're disinclined to say yes to, but it helps you figure out, A, where is the resistance around this, right? Like if you're like, oh, 60% of me wants to be child-free, but 40% of me wants to have kids. Okay, what would make it 100% to child-free, or let's say 80% or 90%? Well, I'd want to know that I would have great community throughout my life. Oh, okay, what else? Well, I'd want to know that I'm going to be taken care of when I'm old. Okay, what else? Well, I'd want to know that I could still have a lot of meaning in my life. Okay, what else? And then those are things that we're going to want to explore. What would a really meaningful life without kids look like? How can you think about cultivating the kind of community you want? How can you, and there's no 100% guarantees or assurances in life, but how can you consider having support in an old age? Because those are really then the issues or areas that we need to work through. And there may be some opportunities to help bring those things into the decision that will then allow us to make it from a better place of like feeling well supported in either choice. Sometimes as well, what we realize is there is nothing that could really make me say yes to this. I shared this example with some clients recently, but I had a friend last year say to me, Keltie, if you were to have all the support in the world, if you would have had, nannies on demand, if you will, or had endless amounts of money, like to be able to have and raise kids, would you think you would have pursued motherhood? And for me, it was a very quick no, because those were not the things that were standing in my way of saying yes to motherhood. It wasn't a lack of support, it wasn't a lack of finances. That's not to say I necessarily am fully well equipped in those areas. But for me, it was just, I didn't have enough desire to have kids. And so by looking at the circumstances in which you might be a yes to either having kids or being child-free, that can help you figure out what, if anything, might make this decision a yes for you. And then you have to figure out whether that's possible, right? Like, so if you said, I would be a heck yes to having kids if I was with this wonderful, amazing, supportive partner, and you're single and there's no dating prospects, and let's say you're 41 years old and you're like, I don't know if that's going to happen. Okay, then we need to contend with, to go back to that previous point I'd made earlier in this episode about like confronting the reality of, okay, well, based on the fact you're 41, that you don't have those dating prospects, like we need to consider if solo parenthood might be a thing, and or how much time you might be able to reasonably have or buy for this decision. But at least then we're pinpointing, okay, you want to make this decision in a way where you're supported, where you're on a team, where you're doing this together. And there may be some ways of bringing some of those things in, like, okay, maybe with solo parenthood, what would support look like? Are there untraditional means of having and raising a child that could be interesting? I remember speaking with someone who said, in the Netherlands, it's not uncommon for a single woman to have a child with a gay couple, and that's an arrangement, sort of a co-parenting arrangement that is actually quite commonplace. And so there could be some other options for you to explore there. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, that's the missing piece of the equation. And so then we need to consider the decision in light of that. If you want to explore this more, I would suggest there's a couple different episodes. So actually, in both of these, I'm realizing are with parents. But of course, delving into any of the episodes and just paying attention to like the kind of version of the life that has been cultivated specific to that person and their decision could be interesting. So the first is episode 65 with Jennifer Heimlich, who talks about keeping your passions when you have kids. And Jennifer is a big runner. For her, she had concerns about identity loss. Her and her husband really worked through how she and they could uphold this passion of theirs, and seemingly have done quite a good job doing so. And so knowing that like this was something that potentially was a stumbling block or a concern for her as she considered motherhood, and looking at how she could bring it into place, has allowed her to have a more feel-good motherhood experience. The other episode is episode 67 with Stacey Hicks on being one and done. And again, for Stacey, and this was not something she necessarily was clear on before having had her daughter, but her and her husband have realized that their version of parenthood is having one child, and sort of I don't want to say there's simplicity in having one child. Of course, there's can be complexities involved in that, but like relative simplicity or quietude of having a single or solo child rather than having multiples. So that's an interesting one that reflects this idea as well. Okay, the last point I want to touch on in this episode is that a question we've been exploring and that I always explore with, really all my clients is, what is a fulfilling life for you? So many of us are fixated on feeling fulfilled, feeling happy, feeling good. Nothing wrong with that, right? Those are great objectives to have. But considering and asking yourself first, what is a fulfilling life? What does that look like? What does that encompass? What is life ultimately all about? That is going to help you better sort of orientate yourself with this decision. Because what fulfillment for you is like, fulfillment is living a life that feels aligned with and true to who I am. Then it's really about figuring out, okay, well, who am I? What am I asking for? How can I best express who I am? And what decision is going to allow me to do that? If being fulfilled for you is having connections to generations past, present, and future, and having these really sort of close connected multi-generational family ties, that very well might look like having your own children and, continuing forth this sort of legacy as people frame it. Now, it doesn't have to necessitate that. I encourage you that when you think about what a fulfilled life looks like or feels like, or how that is sort of portrayed for you, to think about, are there ways of, I guess, let's say, creating this kind of fulfillment no matter what you choose? So if the priority is family connections, multi-generational ties, having impact on people past and present, what are some ways that you could do that as a child-free person, as well as a person with kids? And so sort of trying this on for size in both scenarios can help you then figure out, is this really possible no matter what? Or are my ideas of a fulfilled life maybe more aligned with one path or another? Fulfillment for me in many ways has to do with connection. It has to do with my independence. It has to do with living life on my own terms. It has to do with feeling very free and sort of unencumbered. And that's not to say that I couldn't have experienced some of those things, or to all of them to some extent, through motherhood, but being child-free felt like it was a greater honoring of those things, of my version of a fulfilled life. And so that was one reason that, of course, I've ultimately chosen the child-free path. Episodes you might want to tune into on this are episode 68 with Lucy Megason on how to thrive solo. And Lucy talks so much about just what a fulfilled life she has, and how fulfilling life, not just without children, but as a single person, can be. She expounds on, the different ways in which she feels fulfilled. And so there's some great inspiration ideas there in that episode. And then episode 72 with Dr. Amanda Adelier on empowering fertility journeys with knowledge. Amanda and I didn't speak too much about her own journey, because mostly it was really focused on the knowledge that she has to share as a physician, fertility expert. But that being said, she does share, and it's towards the end of the episode, that for her, she realized that despite having had a lot of accomplishments, despite having a lot of enjoyment in her life, there was this fulfillment piece, or this missing piece, that she felt, and it seems has been able to realize through having children. So that might be an interesting one for you as well. All right, that is all for me. Let us wrap up this final episode of season 5. I want to thank you for listening, for following along, for all of your support. And I'm going to make the ask that I always do, maybe with a little more forcefulness this time. And that is, would you please go ahead and leave a rating or review for the podcast? If you've been thinking, oh my gosh, I keep meaning to do that every time she mentions it, I think I'm going to, and I haven't yet, take 30 seconds. Having a well-rated and reviewed podcast helps it get discovered by more people. It gets shown more often. It gets suggested. It builds credibility. This is going to allow more people to be benefited by the coaching work that I'm doing, by the podcast itself. And it's also a big help for me to get the work that I'm doing, this podcast that I am producing each and every week, out into the world. So you can either do that on Spotify, where you can leave a star rating, or on Apple Podcasts, where you can leave a rating and a review. A few kind words on Apple Podcasts is always very helpful. So thank you again for tuning in. Again, our next season is going to be airing on September 10th. And of course, I've got to reference my calendar while I do that. Yes, September 10th, making sure I've got the dates right. And again, if you want to DM me, email me with guest suggestions, either particular individuals you'd like to see on, or particular topics or challenges you'd like to see addressed, those would be very welcome. All right. I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy these last few weeks of August and early September, and I will see you back here very soon.